Welcome to Complete Histories, the complete story of human history from the first spark of civilization to the modern world. Tonight is part 1, the ancient world, when cities first rose, writing first appeared, and humanity took its earliest steps. If you'd like, share where you're listening from. Settle in, get comfortable, and let's drift into the beginnings of our story. Our epic begins not with kings or empire, but with atoms. 3 billion years ago, the building blocks of life drifted through Earth's primordial seas, tiny sparks of potential in a silent, chaotic world. Leap forward through the abyss of time to 6 million years ago. In the heart of the African savanna, something miraculous stirred. The first hominids, our earliest ancestors, rose and walked upright, setting in motion the great human story. By 1.9 million years ago, a bold new species emerged. Homo erectus, the first to leave Africa, their minds sharper, their fire brighter. They spread across continents, carving a path no creature had walked before. Then came the Neanderthals. 400,000 years ago, they endured the ice, the dark, the unforgiving cold of prehistoric Europe. Their faces were not so different from ours. Their eyes perhaps held dreams, but only one species would survive: Homo sapiens. That's us, the last of our kind, the heirs to every triumph and tragedy that came before. But survival was only the beginning. After eons of wandering, we paused, we planted, we built. And somewhere, perhaps along the banks of the Euphrates or the Nile, we made the most important discovery of all. We learned how to organize. 4,000 years ago, most humans lived in small agricultural communities, growing just enough food to survive. But some ambitious souls were about to change everything. They would invent cities housing tens of thousands of people, create the first writing systems to preserve knowledge across generations, establish laws governing millions, and build empires spanning continents. This is the story of how farmers became pharaohs, how village chiefs rose to command cities and armies, and how humanity forged the blueprint for civilization itself. From 3,500 BCE to 476 CE, we built cities, carved laws into stone, and raised empires that would echo through the ages. Imagine a world where the most advanced technology was a bronze axe, where the fastest way to travel was by foot or donkey, and where most people lived their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. Yet in this seemingly primitive world, humans were about to achieve something amazing. They were going to invent civilization itself. The Bronze Age changed everything. For the first time in human history, small tribes were growing into massive civilizations. Suddenly, people faced a challenge no one had ever solved before: getting thousands of strangers to live and work together. All around the world, brilliant leaders were figuring out their own answers. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and beyond, each civilization discovered unique ways to organize their people. The solutions they created, from laws to leaders to shared beliefs, didn't just build their societies. They laid the foundation for how humans would live together for thousands of years to come. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers lay a land that would witness humanity's most groundbreaking transformation. Mesopotamia, literally the land between rivers, was where scattered farming villages would evolve into the world's first cities, where simple record-keeping would become the first writing systems, and where tribal chiefs would become the first emperors. The Fertile Crescent was civilization's first testing ground, a cradle where one culture after another pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. In Mesopotamia, each rising people left its mark, building on the achievements of the last, crafting layer upon layer of innovation that would shape the future of the world. Around 3,500 BCE, something extraordinary began in the city of Uruk. What the Sumerians discovered wasn't a tool or a weapon, but something far more powerful: a way to manage people, space, and time. Building upon agricultural foundations established during the Neolithic period, they cracked the code of civilization through sophisticated irrigation systems that channeled river water to their fields, creating an oasis of abundance in the desert. Their agricultural mastery created a phenomenon unprecedented in human history: surplus. And with surplus came the revolution of specialization. No longer did every human need to spend their entire day searching for the next meal. Some could become craftsmen, perfecting pottery and metalwork that would be treasured for millennia. Others could become leaders, organizing community efforts on scales never before imagined. Still others could become priests who claimed to speak directly with the gods, or scribes who would develop humanity's first writing systems. Uruk exploded into a thriving center with over 50,000 residents, the world's first true city. The transformation came at a cost that archaeologists can still measure today. Average human height decreased during this period as we traded our hunter-gatherer physiques for more sedentary lifestyles. But what we gained was worth everything. The Sumerians didn't just perfect agriculture. They invented bureaucracy, writing, and the very concept of the city-state. Writing emerged not from poetry or philosophy, but from the practical needs of commerce and administration. The cuneiform script that appeared around 3200 BCE represented humanity's first successful attempt to preserve knowledge and communicate across time and space. Following Uruk's pioneering example, magnificent city-states like Ur, Lagash, and Kish emerged across Mesopotamia. Each developed its own identity, while sharing the common thread of Sumerian culture. These cities competed for resources and dominance, establishing patterns of warfare and diplomacy that would characterize Mesopotamian politics for centuries. According to legend, King Gilgamesh ruled Uruk during this golden age. His epic, later inscribed on clay tablets, became humanity's first great work of literature, exploring timeless themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for life's meaning that still resonate today. In 2334 BCE, a warrior named Sargon the Great changed the world forever. He swept across Mesopotamia, conquering the proud Sumerian city-states one by one. But Sargon did what no conqueror had ever done before. He united them all under his rule, creating the world's first empire. Beyond brute conquest, Sargon unveiled a brand new political design, one where people from different cities, speaking different languages, could live together under one king. Instead of destroying what he conquered, he absorbed it. The Akkadians took Sumerian writing and used it for their own language. They kept local customs alive while binding everything together with Akkadian power. The empire reached all the way from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Akkadian became the language everyone used for trade and diplomacy. A merchant in Babylon could do business with a trader in Syria. An Egyptian diplomat could make deals with Mesopotamian kings. The ancient world had never before spoken with one voice. But empires don't last forever. Around 2154 BCE, disaster struck. Droughts killed their crops, rebellions erupted across the empire. Then mountain warriors called the Gutians swept down from the north. The mighty Akkadian Empire collapsed into chaos. From the ashes of Akkadian rule, the Sumerians rose again. Under the third dynasty of Ur, they created the world's first true government bureaucracy. A system of record-keeping so detailed that modern historians can see exactly how they collected taxes, managed workers, and controlled resources. The Sumerians had learned from their conquerors and emerged stronger than ever. But even this Sumerian renaissance couldn't last forever. By 2004 BCE, their empire had crumbled under the weight of invasion and internal collapse. Once again, Mesopotamia fractured into warring city-states, each fighting for control of the precious rivers and fertile soil. From this chaos emerged a new people, the Babylonians. They built their capital at Babylon, a city that would become legendary and slowly conquered the surrounding region until they controlled the same fertile lands that had once belonged to Sumer and Akkad. Around 1772 BCE, Babylonian king Hammurabi created what would become the foundation of legal systems as we know them today. Standing in his palace, surrounded by the chaos of competing laws and arbitrary justice, Hammurabi envisioned a radical transformation, a society governed by written law rather than royal whim. He ordered the creation of a magnificent 7-foot-tall stone slab inscribed with a comprehensive system of 282 laws that every citizen of his kingdom was required to follow. These laws were remarkably detailed and covered virtually every aspect of human interaction. Law 196 declared with stark simplicity, "If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye." However, Law 199 revealed the social stratification fundamental to Babylonian society. If he destroys the eye of a man's slave, he shall pay 1/2 his price. What King Hammurabi accomplished was nothing short of revolutionary. He created the world's first society explicitly based on written laws rather than arbitrary royal decisions. This concept of legally codified social hierarchy would influence legal systems for millennia to come, establishing precedents we still recognize today. In 1595 BCE, Hittite armies swept down from the north and sacked the great city, ending Babylonian dominance. The conquerors departed as quickly as they came, leaving behind a power vacuum that would reshape Mesopotamia once again. Into this chaos stepped the Kassites, a mountain people who would prove to be exactly what Mesopotamia needed. Though less militarily aggressive than their predecessors, they maintained the trade networks and cultural continuity that preserved Mesopotamian civilization through turbulent times. They were the steady hands that kept the flame of civilization burning when it might otherwise have been extinguished. The Kassites' long reign finally ended around 1155 BCE, but by then they had accomplished something remarkable. They had preserved and passed on thousands of years of Mesopotamian knowledge. The cuneiform script, the legal traditions, the agricultural techniques, and the administrative systems that began with the Sumerians would spread across the ancient world. Mesopotamia had given humanity its first taste of civilization, and that gift would never be forgotten. While mighty civilizations rose and fell in Mesopotamia, other cultures around the Mediterranean Sea were writing their own chapters in the human story. This inland sea was more than water. It was a superhighway for trade, ideas, and people, connecting distant shores from Egypt to Greece, from Anatolia to Canaan. Across its waves sailed merchants, migrants, and myths, linking worlds, spreading technologies, and shaping a shared cultural horizon that would echo for millennia. Along the life-giving banks of the Nile River, black soil stretched as far as the eye could see, a ribbon of fertility cutting through the endless golden desert. Every year, like clockwork, the great river would rise and flood the land, leaving behind rich earth that could feed a civilization. Around 3100 BCE, farmers worked these blessed fields, following the eternal rhythm of flood and harvest. A powerful king named Menes had just accomplished what no human in history had achieved before. He united an entire river valley under one rule, creating the world's first unified nation-state from the chaos of competing tribes. These weren't ordinary people building an ordinary kingdom. The Egyptians were constructing for eternity itself. Their belief drove everything they did. When a pharaoh died in this world, his spirit would continue ruling forever among the gods. This certainty inspired them to create monuments that still amaze us thousands of years later. The tradition began with Pharaoh Djoser around 2667 BCE. Standing in the desert heat, he decided the flat tombs of his ancestors weren't enough. He ordered a bold leap forward, the first monumental stone building in human history, The step pyramid at Saqqara rose from the sand like a man-made mountain, its limestone blocks gleaming white under the sun. Pharaoh Sneferu pushed further, building the innovative bent pyramid and the magnificent red pyramid that glowed at sunset. Then came Pharaoh Khufu, who dreamed bigger than anyone before him. He commissioned the Great Pyramids of Giza. For 20 years, teams of workers moved over 2.3 million stone blocks across the desert, each weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. The sound of chisels striking stone echoed across the Nile Valley from dawn to dusk. When completed around 2566 BCE, this marvel stood 481 feet tall, taller than a 40-story modern building. The precision was remarkable. The base is level to within just 2.1 centimeters. Egyptian society mirrored their greatest monuments, built like a pyramid, with each level supporting those above. At the foundation, roughly 80% of the population worked the Nile's fertile fields as peasants and laborers, their efforts feeding the entire kingdom. The smell of fresh bread and brewing beer filled their mud brick villages. Above them worked skilled artisans who crafted objects of stunning beauty, golden jewelry, intricate furniture inlaid with ivory and ebony, delicate glass vessels. Their workshops hummed with the sounds of hammers and chisels. Then came merchants who loaded their boats with Egypt's treasures, gleaming gold, precious papyrus scrolls, and fine linen, trading throughout the known world for exotic spices, cedar wood, and rare stones. The scribes sat higher, masters of hieroglyphic writing that looked like living art. These men held real power in Egypt, where knowledge meant everything. Those who could read and write controlled information and kept the kingdom's records. Next came the soldiers who guarded Egypt's borders and protected the priests who tended elaborate temples. They performed daily rituals to keep the gods satisfied and the Nile flowing. At the peak sat the pharaoh, part mortal, part living god, the sacred bridge between earth and heaven. The pharaoh wasn't just Egypt's ruler, he was Egypt itself walking among people. When Pharaoh Ramesses II ruled from 1279 to 1213 BCE, he embodied this divine power perfectly. This remarkable man lived over 90 years and left his mark across Egypt. His temple at Abu Simbel still guards the Nile today, 4 massive statues staring across the desert, with eyes that have watched sunrise and sunset for over 3,000 years. Proof that some achievements truly can outlast their creators. On the windswept plains of Anatolia, a legendary city was rising that would capture human imagination for millennia. Troy began as a modest settlement, but its position was extremely valuable. Controlling the crucial passage between Europe and Asia, every merchant ship wanting to reach the Black Sea had to deal with them. As Troy grew richer through the early Bronze Age, so did its ambitions. By the Middle Bronze Age, it had become the crown jewel among increasingly sophisticated city-states scattered across Anatolia. These weren't just towns with walls. They were economic powerhouses controlling trade routes that connected 3 continents. But Troy would soon face formidable neighbors. Rising in the Anatolian highlands was a people who would rewrite the rules of Bronze Age power. The Hittites. What made them dominant wasn't just their military might, though their horse-drawn chariots and siege techniques were legendary, but a far more sophisticated skill. They were master diplomats. While other Bronze Age powers relied purely on force, the Hittites perfected the art of strategic alliances. Under the brilliant leadership of Labarnus, 1680 to 1650 BCE, they united scattered city-states not through conquest alone, but through political genius that won hearts and minds. Their capital at Hattusa was an engineering marvel, a fortress city built on a high plateau, protected by massive stone walls that still inspire awe today. The Hittites discovered something that would reshape warfare: iron. While their enemies still fought with bronze weapons, Hittite smiths had learned to forge iron into superior swords and spearheads. An army with iron weapons facing bronze-armed opponents wasn't much of a fight at all. The ultimate test came when the Hittites crashed into Egyptian power. Around 1274 BCE, at the ancient city of Kadesh, Rameses II marched 20,000 Egyptian warriors straight into 40,000 waiting Hittite fighters. What followed was one of the largest chariot battles in history. Thousands of horses thundering across the battlefield, wheels spinning, dust clouds rising so high they could be seen from miles away. When the dust settled, neither side had won a clear victory. In 1259 BCE, both rulers made history. They signed the world's first formal peace treaty. Former enemies began sharing technology and knowledge, cooperating in ways no one had seen before. This peaceful partnership lasted until the mysterious collapse that swept across the region around 1200 BCE. The Canaanites were the people who lived along the coast of what is now Lebanon and Syria. They built prosperous city-states like Ugarit and Hazor that became vital links between Egypt and Mesopotamia, trading goods and ideas across the ancient world. The real revolution came with the coastal cities of Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon, which became bustling centers of sea trade. The Phoenicians who emerged from this Canaanite tradition developed the first alphabet, a simple writing system that was much easier to learn than Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform. This alphabet would spread throughout the Mediterranean and become the foundation for our modern writing system. In the crystal blue waters of the Aegean Sea, a magical transformation was unfolding. On the scattered Cycladic islands, maritime societies were crafting elegant marble figurines with a simplicity so perfect they could hang in a modern art museum. These weren't primitive island dwellers. They were sophisticated boat builders and traders who understood that the sea wasn't a barrier, but a highway connecting civilizations. It was on the island of Crete where Europe's first high civilization would truly flourish. The Minoans were unlike anyone else in the Bronze Age world. While other civilizations built massive walls and trained armies, the Minoans chose a different path. They built their power on trade, art, and an almost mystical harmony with the natural world. Picture the magnificent palace at Knossos around 1900 BCE, not a grim fortress, but an elegant complex of courtyards, workshops, and living spaces that seemed to breathe with life. Advanced plumbing brought running water through the palace. Elaborate drainage systems rivaled anything built in the next 1,000 years. But it was the art that truly set the Minoans apart. Palace walls exploded with vibrant frescoes, dolphins leaping through azure waves, young athletes vaulting over charging bulls, processions of elegantly dressed figures moving through gardens that seemed too beautiful to be real. Their pottery featured flowing, naturalistic designs that danced across ceramic surfaces. This wasn't just decoration. It was a civilization that had found joy in beauty itself. Perhaps most remarkably, Minoan society appears to have been relatively peaceful and egalitarian. Women held prominent positions. We see them as priestesses and goddesses in the frescoes. There's no evidence of the massive military complexes that dominated other Bronze Age powers. The Minoans had created a rare achievement, a civilization based on prosperity rather than conquest. But change was coming from the Greek mainland. The Mycenaeans were everything the Minoans were not: warriors, conquerors, builders of massive fortifications. When you see the Lion Gate at Mycenae, with its enormous stone blocks fitted together with precision that still baffles engineers, you're looking at a society that lived for war. These were the first Greeks, and they spoke Linear B, the earliest form of written Greek that we can decipher today. Their palace records reveal a world of tribute payments, military inventories, and administrative control that extended across the Mediterranean. They established trading posts from Sicily to the Black Sea, but always with one hand on their sword. The Mycenaeans absorbed much from the peaceful Minoans, adopting their art, architecture, and trade networks, but they reshaped it all to serve a militaristic vision. Where Minoan palaces were airy and open, Mycenaean citadels rose as fortified bastions of stone, built to withstand siege and proclaim power. For centuries they dominated the Aegean world, inspiring the legendary tales of the Trojan War, stories in which they may have been both heroes and villains. Yet around 1200 BCE, this warrior society collapsed in the turmoil of the Late Bronze Age. Their palaces burned, their writing system forgotten, and their political power shattered. Whether undone by foreign invasions, internal strife, or the cascading crises that toppled civilizations across the Mediterranean, the Mycenaeans vanished. All that was left behind were their massive walls, scattered artifacts, and the echoes of an age of conquest. In the valleys of modern Pakistan and northwestern India, a remarkable civilization flourished that built the most sophisticated cities the ancient world had ever seen. The Indus Valley people weren't interested in towering pyramids or massive palaces. They focused on a far more practical goal, making urban life actually work. These ancient engineers created sanitation systems that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. Houses had toilets with seats and chutes that connected to underground drainage networks, carrying sewage away through covered drains that ran beneath every street. While other ancient cities reeked of human waste and suffered constant disease outbreaks, Indus Valley cities stayed clean and healthy. Their urban planning was methodical and precise. Wide streets formed perfect grids, standardized bricks allowed efficient construction, and public baths served both hygiene and social needs. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro featured sophisticated waterproofing and drainage that would impress modern engineers. The Indus Valley civilization also appears remarkably egalitarian. Houses were similar in size and construction, suggesting a society that valued equality over hierarchy, completely different from the pyramid-shaped civilizations emerging elsewhere. Unfortunately, their script remains undeciphered, leaving their thoughts and beliefs locked away like secrets in stone. In distant China, around 2100 BCE, catastrophe struck the Yellow River Valley. The great river burst its banks year after year, turning fertile farmland into muddy lakes and destroying entire harvests. Villagers watched helplessly as floodwaters swept away their homes, their livestock, and their hope. Famine stalked the land, and people began to whisper that the gods had abandoned them. Into this chaos stepped a man who would become legend, Yu the Great. Unlike other rulers who might have prayed to the heavens or fled to higher ground, Yu rolled up his sleeves and got to work. For 13 grueling years, he tramped through marshes and climbed riverbanks, studying every twist and bend of the wild waterway. He mapped flood patterns, calculated water flow, and designed an ambitious network of canals, levees, and dikes. Yu's hands grew calloused from handling shovels and rope. His clothes stayed permanently mud-stained. Legend says he was so devoted to the project that he passed his own house 3 times during construction, but never stopped to visit his family. When the last dike was completed, the Yellow River finally flowed where humans wanted it to flow. The floods ended, crops grew again, and a grateful people proclaimed Yu their emperor. This triumph marked the beginning of the Jia dynasty and established a groundbreaking idea that would shape Chinese politics for thousands of years: the mandate of heaven. Power shouldn't simply pass from father to son. It should flow to whoever proved most capable of serving the people. A ruler who failed his subjects would lose heaven's blessing and forfeit his right to rule. The Jia dynasty was followed by the Shang dynasty, which gives us the first real evidence of Chinese civilization. The Shang ruled from around 1600 to 1046 BCE. Shang craftsmen created beautiful bronze vessels and weapons. They developed early Chinese writing by carving questions into turtle shells and animal bones, then heating them until they cracked. Priests would read the answers from the gods in those crack patterns. This practice helped create the idea of the mandate of heaven, the belief that heaven chose who should rule China. Around 1200 BCE, disaster struck the Bronze Age world. Within a few decades, great civilizations that had lasted for centuries simply collapsed. Trade networks that connected distant lands disappeared. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years burned to the ground. The mighty Hittite Empire vanished completely. One of history's great powers simply disappeared from the records. The Mycenaean Greeks lost their palaces, their writing system, and their complex society, retreating to small villages for centuries. The Canaanite cities of the Levant were destroyed or abandoned. Even mighty Egypt survived but was severely weakened, losing much of its territory and influence. Yet not everyone fell. Assyria in northern Mesopotamia weathered the storm and would later build a new empire. Babylon endured the chaos. Far to the east, China remained largely isolated from this Mediterranean catastrophe, with the Shang dynasty continuing to rule for another century and a half. Among the causes of destruction were the mysterious Sea Peoples, who remain one of history's great puzzles. Egyptian records describe them as raiders and invaders who came from the islands and from the north. But we don't know exactly who they were. They might have been displaced refugees fleeing their own collapsing homelands, pirates taking advantage of the chaos, or a confederation of different groups attacking weakened cities. The collapse wasn't entirely mysterious. Severe droughts weakened agriculture, internal rebellions tore societies apart, and trade networks broke down. But the speed and completeness of the disaster still puzzles historians. How did such powerful civilizations fall so quickly and so thoroughly? While darkness descended on the Mediterranean across the Atlantic Ocean, completely unaware of the old world's catastrophe, a mysterious civilization was emerging in the tropical lowlands of Mexico that would become the foundation for all subsequent Mesoamerican cultures. The Olmec civilization is often called the mother civilization of the Americas, and for good reason. But much about the Olmecs remains tantalizingly mysterious. Scholars still debate whether their surviving glyphs form a complete writing system or represent proto-symbols that historians have yet to fully understand. Thousands of years ago, while Egyptian pharaohs were building their eternal pyramids, this enigmatic civilization was rising in the steaming jungles of Mexico. Their glyphs remain undeciphered, like finding a locked diary with no key. It's one of history's most frustrating puzzles. But the Olmecs left us a haunting and unforgettable legacy. 17 colossal stone heads, each weighing several tons and carved with incredible skill. These aren't just rocks. They're masterpieces that demonstrate artistic sophistication rivaling any civilization in the world. Ancient Mesoamericans believed the head was everything. Your emotions, memories, your very soul lived there. We don't know their names like we know Ramesses or Hammurabi. We can't read their thoughts or understand their beliefs. But when you stand before these stone giants and look into their eyes, you feel a profound connection. Their presence. In a way, they've achieved immortality, frozen in time, waiting for us to unlock their secrets and discover what their lost civilization truly accomplished. The Olmec legacy didn't disappear when their civilization faded. Instead, it lived on in new cultures, including the remarkable Zapotec, who emerged around 500 BCE in the Oaxaca region of Mexico. Where the Olmecs had built in the coastal lowlands, the Zapotec chose the mountains, constructing their magnificent capital city of Monte Alban on a mountaintop overlooking the entire Oaxaca Valley. This represented sophisticated urban planning and engineering that built brilliantly upon Mesoamerican traditions. The city housed a ruling elite who governed a hierarchical society of skilled artisans and farmers. Like their Olmec predecessors, the Zapotec developed their own writing system using symbols and glyphs, though theirs proved more decipherable than the mysterious Olmec script. The Zapotec were renowned throughout Mesoamerica for their innovative agricultural practices, including advanced maize cultivation techniques that sustained communities even during severe droughts. They also created an advanced calendar system based on intricate 260-day ritual cycles and 365-day solar cycles. This demonstrated astronomical knowledge that rivaled any civilization in the world, continuing the Mesoamerican tradition of sophisticated timekeeping that would later reach its absolute peak with the Maya. While these isolated civilizations developed their own solutions across the ocean, the Old World was experiencing its own breakthrough. The Iron Age emerged as an innovation born of desperation. With trade routes shattered, metalworkers could no longer obtain the tin needed to make bronze. Forced to experiment, they turned to iron, a metal they had long dismissed as inferior to gleaming bronze. Iron ore lay scattered across the earth in abundance, unlike precious tin that required vast trading networks spanning continents. Though iron proved stubborn and difficult to work, desperate smiths discovered that with higher temperatures and new techniques, they could forge it into something stronger than bronze had ever been. This iron revolution would spread across the world at different speeds, but nowhere would it flourish more successfully than in the ancient civilizations of Asia. Far from the collapsing Mediterranean powers, stable kingdoms in India and China could fully embrace iron's potential, using it to support larger populations and develop sophisticated cultures that would shape human thought for millennia. In India, iron technology was already centuries old, giving the subcontinent a crucial advantage. As iron plows opened new farmland along the sacred Ganges River, kingdoms emerged across northern India. This was the Vedic period, when the great Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, were composed, telling tales of heroic kings and cosmic battles. Iron tools allowed these kingdoms to clear dense forests and expand agriculture on an unprecedented scale. By 600 BCE, 16 major kingdoms called the Mahajanapadas controlled northern India, their iron-armed soldiers and iron-plowed fields supporting growing populations and increasingly sophisticated cultures. Around 563 BCE, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama was born into luxury in what is now Nepal. This perfection lasted until he ventured outside his palace for the first time and saw an old man dying on the street, a sight that fundamentally changed his understanding of human existence. Realizing that suffering, aging, and death were inevitable parts of life that couldn't be avoided through wealth or power, Siddhartha abandoned his luxurious life to seek enlightenment. After 6 years of meditation and study, he sat under a fig tree and achieved complete enlightenment, becoming the Buddha, the awakened one. The Mauryan Empire emerged under Chandragupta Maurya in 321 BCE, spanning much of modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. The third ruler, Ashoka the Great, initially followed the traditional path of conquest until a bloody war against Kalinga killed over 100,000 people. Standing among the battlefield corpses, Ashoka experienced a profound spiritual crisis and turned to Buddhist teachings. His dominion became renowned for supporting non-violence and compassion, one of history's most complete reversals from a conquering warlord to peaceful philosopher king. After centuries of fragmentation, the Gupta Empire emerged in 320 CE, establishing India's most brilliant age. Sanskrit literature reached new heights, but the Guptas' greatest achievements came in mathematics and astronomy. At universities like Nalanda, Indian scholars developed the concept of zero into a true number and created the decimal system, breakthroughs that would transform commerce, engineering, and science forever. The Guptas practiced remarkable religious tolerance, supporting both Hindu traditions and Buddhist monasteries. Art and architecture flourished, while trade networks spread Indian cultural and religious influences across Southeast Asia, creating lasting influence that would shape the region forever. Meanwhile, China was tearing itself apart. The Zhou dynasty's divine mandate had crumbled, and 7 warring kingdoms battled for supremacy across the land in an endless cycle of violence. During the earlier Zhou period, 2 great philosophers had emerged whose teachings would shape Chinese thought for millennia. Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, had developed a philosophy emphasizing moral cultivation, respect for tradition, and social harmony through proper relationships between rulers and subjects. His teachings stressed that good government came through virtuous examples rather than force. Around the same time, the mysterious sage Lao Tzu founded Taoism, teaching that true wisdom came from understanding and following the natural order of the universe, the Wei, or Tao, rather than fighting against it. But now, traditional Confucian ideals of harmony and virtue seemed useless in a world where strength alone determined survival. The peaceful wisdom of Lao Tzu's Taoism felt equally powerless against the brutal realities of endless warfare. Into this chaos stepped Han Feizi with a new philosophy: legalism. While Confucians preached about inherent human goodness and Taoists spoke of natural balance, Han Feizi saw the brutal reality that surrounded him daily. People were fundamentally selfish and would only follow rules when faced with real, immediate consequences. Han Feizi's solution was as cold as it was logical. Forget moral persuasion and elaborate ritual ceremonies. What China desperately needed was an iron-fisted ruler with absolute power over every aspect of society: the military, the economy, even private behavior. This ruler would govern through a simple, brutal equation: obey the law and prosper, break it and face severe punishment. Fear, not love, would hold the state together. The philosophy was harsh, but it promised an end to the chaos. In a world where weakness meant death, legalism offered strength and order. One ambitious king was listening very carefully to these ideas. Qin Shi Huang achieved the impossible. He united China under one throne. The endless wars were finally over. 7 kingdoms that had torn each other apart for centuries now knelt before a single emperor. Using the iron fist of legalism, he standardized everything: laws, currency, even the way people wrote. China had never been more unified or more controlled. But the emperor's death in 210 BCE shattered everything. Without their iron-willed ruler, the legalist system collapsed like a house of cards. Rebellions erupted across the empire as people who had endured years of harsh punishment finally fought back. The Qin dynasty, which had seemed invincible, crumbled in just 4 years. From the ruins rose Liu Bang, a peasant who had clawed his way to power through cunning and ruthlessness. When he established the Han dynasty in 206 BCE, he made a crucial decision: abandon the failed legalist approach. Instead, he embraced Confucian principles of moderation and moral governance. The people, exhausted by tyranny, welcomed the change with open arms. The Han dynasty didn't just survive, it thrived magnificently. Silk production exploded, creating wealth for merchants brave enough to carry the precious fabric across deadly deserts and treacherous mountain passes. In 138 BCE, Emperor Han Wu dispatched convoys into the unknown west, opening trade routes that would become the legendary Silk Road. Chinese silk began flowing to Mediterranean markets, where a single bolt could buy a small fortune. But Chinese silk would never have reached Roman toga-wearing senators without the crucial middlemen who made the impossible possible. In the great trading cities of Central Asia, Samarkand and Bukhara, Sogdian merchants became the invisible heroes of the Silk Road. When a Roman patrician draped himself in Chinese silk, he probably had no idea his luxury had passed through a dozen hands across 4,000 miles of deserts, mountains, and hostile kingdoms. The Sogdians were the ones who made it all work. They spoke Chinese to buy silk in Kashgar, Persian to negotiate passage through hostile territories, and Arabic to sell in Damascus markets. While empires waged wars and built monuments, the Sogdians quietly built something more valuable: the networks that held the ancient world together. Without them, the greatest trade route in history would have been just a nice idea that died in the desert. They didn't conquer lands, they conquered distance itself. The Han would rule for over 400 years, proving that sometimes the gentle hand succeeds where the iron fist fails completely. Their empire reached westward along these very trade routes, where Chinese merchants encountered the great powers that controlled the lands between east and west. And among the greatest of these powers, rising across the vast steppes and mountains of Central Asia, was a realm that would dwarf even Han China in scope and influence. Young Cyrus would rewrite the map of Asia. Born into a world where his grandfather, King Astyages of the Medes, had ordered his death based on a terrifying prophetic dream, Cyrus survived through what seemed like miraculous circumstances. When he reached adulthood, that ancient prophecy came to pass. He revolted against his grandfather and won decisively in 550 BCE. But Cyrus wasn't content with merely overthrowing his grandfather's Median kingdom, the dominant power that had ruled much of the Iranian plateau and helped topple the mighty Assyrians. His ambitions stretched far beyond family revenge. He continued his conquests with methodical brilliance, capturing the great city of Babylon and becoming supreme ruler of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization itself. What made Cyrus revolutionary wasn't just his military genius, it was his completely new approach to ruling conquered peoples. Unlike previous conquerors who imposed their culture and destroyed local traditions, Cyrus allowed subject peoples to maintain their own customs and beliefs. When he conquered Babylon, he freed the Jewish exiles who had been held captive for decades and actually funded the rebuilding of their temple in Jerusalem. The grateful Jews called him the Anointed One, a sacred title reserved for their greatest leaders. This tolerant policy wasn't just kindness, it was political genius that earned him the fierce loyalty of diverse populations across his vast realm and the title Cyrus the Great. His dominion eventually encompassed territories from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, creating one of the largest kingdoms the world had ever seen. The Persians developed an efficient administrative system, with provinces governed by appointed officials who were connected by extensive road networks that enabled rapid communication across vast distances. This was a government on a scale and sophistication that dwarfed anything that had come before. When Cyrus conquered the Greek colony of Ionia in Asia Minor, he brought Persians into direct contact with Greek civilization for the first time, setting the stage for the epic conflicts that would define classical antiquity. When Cyrus died, he left this vast empire to successors including Darius the Great, who would attempt to extend Persian rule into mainland Greece. This growing Persian empire would soon clash with the Greek city-states, setting the stage for legendary conflicts that would determine whether East or West would dominate the ancient world. South of Egypt, along the Nile River, the kingdom of Kush controlled the trade routes between Africa and the Mediterranean world, becoming wealthy through their mastery of ironworking and control of gold mines. Their capital at Meroe became one of the ancient world's greatest iron production centers, with smoke from countless forges darkening the sky. This technological superiority enabled them to achieve something extraordinary. They conquered Egypt itself around 750 BCE, ruling as the 25th dynasty for nearly a century. These black pharaohs built more pyramids than any Egyptian dynasty, creating the stunning royal cemetery at Meroe with over 200 pyramids. But Kush was more than just a regional power. They controlled the flow of gold, ivory, and exotic animals from the African interior to the Mediterranean networks that connected Greece, Rome, and Persia. The kingdom would prove remarkably enduring, lasting over 1,400 years, longer than most empires. Their queens, known as Kandakes, wielded real political power and led armies into battle. When Roman forces later tried to invade, Queen Amanirenas successfully resisted them, forcing Rome to negotiate a treaty that recognized Kushite independence. For millennia, the interior of Africa remained largely outside the orbit of the great urban civilizations to the north. But it was far from empty. Across the forests and grasslands of West and Central Africa, small communities developed rich oral traditions, deep knowledge of their environment, and close-knit clan-based societies. Then came iron. Around 1000 BCE, the Iron Revolution began to reshape life across this region. Whether independently discovered or introduced through trade and contact, iron tools unlocked a new age of possibility. Bantu-speaking peoples, armed with iron axes and agricultural knowledge, began one of the most significant migrations in human history. Starting around 1000 BCE, these communities expanded slowly but steadily from their West and Central African heartlands, carrying with them iron plows that could cut through dense tropical forest, iron weapons for hunting, and new crops like yams and bananas that thrived in varied climates. Over 1,500 years, they would populate most of Eastern and Southern Africa, a movement involving millions of people across thousands of miles. Unlike conquering armies, this was a gradual and organic expansion, families and farmers seeking better land, not empire. The Bantu brought pottery techniques, metalworking skills, and farming practices that reshaped entire ecosystems. They didn't build stone cities or leave written records, but their impact was no less profound. By 500 CE, Bantu-speaking societies had established the cultural and agricultural foundation for future African kingdoms from Kenya to South Africa. Their languages spread across the continent, forming the backbone of hundreds of ethnic groups. Today, over 400 million people speak Bantu languages, a living legacy of one of humanity's most sweeping and underappreciated civilizational shifts. In Greece, the Bronze Age collapse had ushered in a dark age that lasted 4 centuries. The great Mycenaean palaces lay in ruins. People forgot how to write. Trade vanished. Populations scattered into isolated villages clinging to survival. But around 800 BCE, Greece began to stir again. The rocky, sun-baked soil of the mainland couldn't sustain its growing people. Grain shortages turned into hunger. Families watched their children grow thin while merchant ships passed by, bound for richer lands. The Greeks responded with a bold solution. They would export their people. Across the Aegean and beyond, city-states like Miletus and Corinth launched organized colonization missions. Not chaotic migrations, but state-sponsored expeditions. Each new colony was carefully chosen for access to arable land, fresh water, and proximity to trade routes. Scouts were sent ahead. Religious rituals sanctified the departure. The mother city, Metropolis, would bless the new colony, Apoikia, and maintain bonds of kinship and trade. This wasn't empire. It was replication. Each colony was a miniature Greece, complete with temples, agora, and language. Over time, hundreds of these outposts sprang up, from the Black Sea to Spain. Miletus alone founded over 80 colonies, while others like Syracuse and Massalia, modern Marseille, became major powers in their own right. The Greeks had turned the Mediterranean into a constellation of civilization, their colonies linked by sea lanes and shared identity. Merchant ships returned home heavy with the grain that fed the next generation, and the Greeks, once on the brink of starvation, began their climb toward greatness. The clash between East and West became inevitable when Darius the Great, Cyrus's successor, finally turned Persian attention to Greece. When he brought overwhelming force, 20,000 men, to Marathon in 490 BCE, the Athenians seemed hopelessly outmatched with only 10,000 soldiers. Yet through superior tactics and desperate courage, they achieved the impossible. The Greek hoplites, heavily armored infantry soldiers, crushed the lighter Persian foot soldiers. The battlefield was littered with 6,400 Persian bodies, while the Athenians lost only 192 men. The victory was so stunning that messenger Pheidippides ran 26.2 miles from Marathon to Athens to announce the triumph, creating the world's first marathon. But the Persians weren't finished. Xerxes, Darius's son, returned with an even more massive force, over 100,000 soldiers, determined to complete his father's mission. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans under King Leonidas made their legendary stand alongside 7,000 other Greek warriors. Though ultimately defeated when the Persians discovered a mountain path, their sacrifice bought precious time. The subsequent naval battle at Salamis saw the Greeks use the narrow straits to devastating effect. They trapped the Persian fleet and dealt them a crushing defeat. The brilliant Athenian general Themistocles lured 500 Persian triremes into confined waters where 300 Greek vessels could destroy them. The final blow came at Plataea in 479 BCE, where the Greeks prevailed against all odds, ending the Persian threat. The Persian defeat ushered in what historians call the Golden Age of Greece. Athens, no longer threatened by foreign invasion, channeled its energy into unprecedented cultural achievements. The Parthenon rose on the Acropolis, its marble columns reaching toward the heavens. Theatre flourished with playwrights like Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Aristophanes creating works that still move audiences today. Philosophy blossomed as thinkers like Plato questioned the very nature of reality and governance. Two dramatically different political systems emerged: Spartan militarism versus Athenian democracy. Sparta was a military powerhouse where everything focused on warfare. Athens experimented with humanity's first participatory government through the Council of 500, selected by random lottery to prevent corruption, and the Assembly, where over 30,000 male citizens could vote on important matters. However, not everyone was impressed with democracy. The philosopher Plato considered it fundamentally flawed, arguing that governing required specialized knowledge. Instead of democracy, Plato advocated for the philosopher king, a ruler dedicated to studying wisdom and reasoning. In 356 BCE, in the Kingdom of Macedonia, the greatest military commander in history was born. Alexander the Great grew up knowing he was destined for leadership. Tutored by Aristotle himself, the philosopher known as the father of logic. Alexander was only 20 when his father was assassinated in 336 BCE. When the Greek city of Thebes decided to revolt, Alexander marched his army 240 miles in just 14 days. When Thebes refused to surrender, Alexander razed the entire city to the ground, making an example that echoed across Greece. Alexander's next target was the Persian Empire. In 333 BCE, he faced the Persian army at the Battle of Issus, where Darius III was defeated and forced to flee. In 331 BCE, Alexander faced Darius again at the decisive Battle of Gaugamela. Despite being significantly outnumbered, Alexander achieved a stunning victory through superior tactics, completely shattering the Persian army. Following this victory, Alexander captured Babylon and gained control of Mesopotamia. He continued eastward, winning battles in modern-day Iran and Afghanistan. In 330 BCE, he captured Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. Alexander pushed toward India, crossing the Hindu Kush mountains. However, after years of continuous campaigning, his exhausted troops refused to march further. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE at age 32. Alexander died leaving an empire that stretched from Egypt to India, and no clear heir. His generals, the Diadochi, immediately began carving up his conquests. 3 kingdoms emerged from the bloodbath. Ptolemy seized Egypt and established a Greek dynasty that would rule for 3 centuries. These Greek pharaohs built Alexandria into the intellectual capital of the ancient world, with the great library becoming a magnet for scholars. The famous Cleopatra VII was actually the last of this Greek ruling family. Seleucus grabbed the eastern territories, a sprawling realm from Turkey to Afghanistan that proved impossible to hold together. Antigonus kept Macedonia and Greece itself, though his kingdom was the smallest and poorest of the three. Greek culture spread across the known world, but Greek political power was already fading. A new force was rising in the west that would eventually swallow all three successor kingdoms whole. Among the emerging settlements of the Mediterranean was a city that would eventually eclipse them all: Rome. Legend tells us that twin brothers Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants and nursed by a she-wolf, founded this city in 753 BCE. When the brothers couldn't agree on who would rule, Romulus killed his own brother. Rome was born from violence and blessed by divine intervention. Initially ruled by sophisticated Etruscan kings, Rome learned governance, engineering, and military organization from its advanced neighbors. But what made Rome truly special was how it treated outsiders. While exclusive Greek city-states built walls around their citizenship, Rome did the opposite, offering conquered peoples a path to becoming Roman. They could keep their customs, worship their gods, and still be absorbed into the growing republic. This wasn't mercy. It was political genius. In 509 BCE, Romans overthrew their last king, Tarquin the Proud, and established the Roman Republic, a system where two consuls shared power, each able to veto the other. Backed by a powerful senate and a growing citizen army, Rome expanded steadily across the Italian peninsula. Its greatest test came against Carthage, its rival for control of the western Mediterranean. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, ended with Roman victory and its first overseas territory, Sicily. But the Second Punic War brought an even greater threat: the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal, who led his army and elephants over the Alps in a daring invasion of Italy. At Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal annihilated a Roman army twice the size of his own in one of history's most devastating defeats. Rome, however, refused to collapse. It adapted. General Scipio Africanus counter-invaded North Africa and defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. Carthage fell, and Rome emerged as the master of the western Mediterranean. Flush with victory, Rome expanded further, conquering Greece, absorbing the Hellenistic kingdoms, and pushing into Gaul and Spain. But with success came internal decay. Generals began building personal armies loyal to themselves, not the Republic. Among them rose Julius Caesar, a brilliant general, master politician, and skilled orator who conquered Gaul and won the hearts of the Roman people. In 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act of treason that sparked civil war. The die is cast, he declared, and marched on Rome. He seized power, defeated all rivals, and was declared dictator for life. Caesar restructured the calendar, redistributed land, expanded citizenship, and centralized authority. He wore the purple of a king, but refused the crown. It was too much for Rome's old guard. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by senators who feared monarchy. But in killing him, they unleashed the very empire they hoped to avoid. More civil wars followed. Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. In 27 BCE, he became Augustus, Rome's first emperor. The Republic was dead. The empire had begun. Under Augustus, the Roman Empire became the dominant power of the ancient world. Its legions marched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Rome swallowed entire kingdoms: Gaul, Egypt, Judea, Dacia, and parts of Germany. It established provinces stretching from the wind-swept highlands of Britain to the lush river valleys of Mesopotamia, from the deserts of North Africa to the alpine borders of the Danube. At its height under Emperor Trajan, The empire ruled over 5 million square kilometers and as many as 70 million people, nearly 1/5 of the world's population. It was during Augustus's reign, in a small stable in Roman-occupied Judea, that Jesus of Nazareth was born. He preached a radical message that all people, rich or poor, citizen or slave, were equal before God. He healed the sick, forgave sinners, and challenged both the Roman authorities and the religious elite. Around 30 CE, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate ordered his crucifixion. But instead of silencing his message, it ignited a movement. His followers believed he had risen from the dead. Stories of his life and teachings spread across the empire, passed from village to village, port to port. Christianity began as a small, persecuted sect, but within a few centuries, it would become the official religion of the Roman world. Meanwhile, Rome's emperors reshaped the world through conquest, infrastructure, and law. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, established the foundations of imperial rule. Claudius conquered Britain. Nero burned his name into infamy. After his death, the Flavian dynasty, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, restored order and built the iconic Colosseum. Then came the 5 good emperors of the Nerva-Antonine dynasty: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. They oversaw the golden age of the empire. Under Trajan, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent. Hadrian fortified the frontiers, including his famous wall in northern Britain. But while emperors expanded borders and built monuments, a spiritual transformation was quietly taking root, one that would eventually transform the Roman world from within. The death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE marked the end of Rome's golden age and the beginning of a slow, unraveling decline. His son Commodus ruled as a reckless despot, setting a precedent of instability. Beneath the surface, deep tensions simmered: a faltering economy, overstretched borders, and a growing cultural divide between Roman polytheism and the rising tide of Christian monotheism. That tension erupted in moments of violence. When Rome burned in 64 CE, Emperor Nero infamously blamed the Christians, unleashing brutal persecutions. But rather than extinguish the movement, martyrdom only fueled its growth. Christianity spread through cities, markets, and legions, quietly reshaping the empire from within. Then, between 235 and 284 CE, came the crisis of the 3rd century, a nearly fatal collapse. In just 50 years, Rome saw over 20 emperors, most killed by rivals or mutinous troops. Civil wars raged, barbarians crossed weakened frontiers, trade collapsed, the empire fractured into warring states. Hope returned with a vision. In 312 CE, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the general Constantine claimed to see a blazing cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields and won a stunning victory over his rival Maxentius. But the victory wasn't just military, it was spiritual. Constantine, once a traditional pagan, became the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity. He saw in its structure, discipline, and unifying moral code a way to stabilize his fragmented empire. A year later, his Edict of Milan officially legalized Christianity, ending centuries of persecution. Constantine didn't stop at tolerance. He made Christianity central to imperial identity. He built churches, exempted clergy from taxes, and lavished imperial patronage on the growing faith. In 325 CE, he convened the Council of Nicaea, gathering bishops from across the empire to define core Christian beliefs, laying the foundation for centuries of orthodoxy. He also founded a new capital, Constantinople. Strategically located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, it symbolized a reborn Rome, Christian in spirit and global in ambition. In just a few decades, Christianity had moved from the margins to the center of power, its cross now raised over the empire itself. But faith alone could not save an empire under siege. From the east came the Huns, led by the fearsome Attila, tearing across Europe and pressuring Roman defenses to the breaking point. Rome, desperate for allies, turned to Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, not as enemies, but as soldiers and settlers. It was a dangerous gamble. In 410 CE, the Visigoths under Alaric sacked Rome itself. The first time in 800 years the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign army. The shock reverberated across the known world. In the decades that followed, it bled territory with alarming speed. Carthage was lost to the Vandals. Britain, Gaul, and Spain fragmented into competing kingdoms. In 455 CE, Rome was sacked again, this time by sea. Its wealth plundered, its authority hollow. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was Roman in name only. Its emperors were puppets, its legions were mercenaries. Its cities, once marvels of the ancient world, fell into neglect and ruin. Then, in 476 CE, the curtain closed. A Germanic general named Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, a teenage figurehead with no real power. No armies came to restore him, no emperors followed. The imperial crown was sent east to Constantinople, a silent admission that the Western Empire was finished. The Western Roman Empire, after centuries of glory, was no more. And yet, Rome did not fall entirely. Its laws, its language, its faith, and its memory endured, absorbed into the kingdoms that followed. In the east, the empire lived on. From the golden domes of Constantinople, Roman emperors would rule for nearly 1,000 more years. We call them the Byzantines, but they called themselves Romans. The fall of Rome was not the end. It was a turning point. From its ashes, new powers rose. In the Arabian desert, a merchant named Muhammad received revelations that would ignite a global faith. Across Europe and the Near East, kingdoms, churches, and empires emerged to claim the legacy of antiquity. From the first canals of Mesopotamia to the conversion of Constantine, the ancient world shaped how humans would live, rule, believe, and build. Law, religion, power, and philosophy, all born in this era, would echo for millennia. This was more than survival. It was the creation of meaning. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire did not erase the past. It planted seeds for the future. The world had changed. The transformation was complete. Join us in the next installment as we witness the rise of Islam, the Viking raids, the Crusades, and the birth of the modern world in the medieval period.